Welcome to part 18 of this video series about building the brand website. In this one, I'll tackle uploading files and images from the Blazor frontend to the .NET 8 minimal API, which will then store the file into the Azure Blob storage. Let's start with the demo. So I made a sidebar with a file picker, and then I can select multiple files, and 3 is the maximum that I set. I can remove a file if I want to, and then choose another one. I can reset, or I can simply save those to the Azure Blob storage, and then I will get back the URL. So I could go to my Markdown editor and then use it in here as the image, new image for blog post. And it also supports different file types, for example HTML. Then that is what it will look like, and I can save these as well. So I made the files module with only a backend project and a frontend project. So class library and a Razor class library, and then another class library that simply holds a few DTOs, data transfer objects, request, response, and the API routes. Then the API has the typical extensions. The endpoint, just one endpoint, post, and that can accept either files or images, but we're using form data. To get those files out of the request data, we can use the parameter binding, the interface iForm file collection. For one file, let's say you only send one file over, you could use the iForm file. So that is new in .NET 8. Before that, I don't think these interfaces were supported. The parameter binding for form data and files was not included or not working properly, at least in .NET 6 and 7. Do note this disable anti-forgery. This is simply to avoid a nasty middleware stack trace error on each endpoint that accepts form data. So not JSON data, form data. Let's say you're not in the .NET 8 version yet, you could also simply try the following: HTTP request, just call it request, and then have a variable files equals request.form.files. You could access the files that way as well. Maybe it's time to rethink the strategy and maybe step away from the form data, since we're actually just posting from a client project to a server project with some file data. Maybe we could just use JSON, but then we would have to encode the actual file, the image or the file contents, to a base64 string. Let's take a look at the file uploader. Is just a custom class I created to prevent having all of this business logic in the controller. Making a new list of upload file response, just a name and uploaded URL, which I expect back to send back to my frontend, to then call the blob storage client, which is going to actually upload to the Azure Blob storage. We pass along the file name and the contents of the file, the stream, and then that object that we constructed will fill that uploaded URL property with the URL we're getting back. And then finally, when everything's done, we'll return the entire list of, which should contain the file name and the successfully uploaded URL. Let's take a look at that blob storage client. Then the blob container client comes from the Azure Storage Blobs NuGet package. That's a base URL. Most of these URLs are the same, so they basically contain a similar structure, but just the account name and the container name will be different between a link of my account and between a link of your account. And then finally we have that upload that accepts the file name, so we call it blob name, and that stream that we just saw, open stream. And then we just call the method from the client upload blob async, and we return that base URL, so this one, / and then the new blob name. This is actually not the original file name, but we'll see that in the front end. This is a unique GUID actually, because it has to be random, because if you try to upload a file that already exists in that container, then you're getting an error back from Azure. And then you see the blob storage config connection string, account name and container name. This, of course, you have to add these into your app settings. So that would be in the implementation project, in the brand API, and in the app settings. So that would look more like this. So if we take a look at Azure, we could just go to storage accounts or search for it. I have 2 accounts, pet blob stores for a different project, and then the brand website blob store. So that's my account name, storage account name, the app settings. And then to get the connection string, if you made that account, so you see this in here again, account name, and then the connection string, and then you should copy that over into your app settings. The containers, you can find at the containers, and there you could add a container. Yeah, I made covers and images. Images is the one you just saw, but you could make a new one. Let's just make it files, or let's call it ads. And then it's important that if you want to display these images publicly, so just use that uploaded URL straight into your front end, then you'll want to have the blob anonymous read for blobs only. Then it's time for the front end, the files HTTP client. So this makes sure the files are sent to the backend over HTTP, but not as JSON this time, as form data. Then we give it the name files, which is the key where all the files can be found. And that's also what we're using for that parameter binding in the minimal API. So that should be the same as the name of the parameter. If it was successful, we're expecting back that list of uploaded URLs and new file names. Let's take a look at the files upload requests. Maybe that's interesting to you. Oh yeah, just a list of files to upload, which contains name, content type. That content is the byte array. And the extensions, nothing fancy, just registering that HTTP client. Imports, nothing special. And then in the upload files, we just have 2 layouts. The actual upload files layout to select the files or the images to upload, and then the preview, so the cards that you saw. As long as we didn't hit the maximum amount of files, so we didn't select more or an equal amount to the maximum amount of files, we still want to see that upload form. So that's this if statement. We're giving it a random GUID, so we could have multiple file pickers on the same page, for example, and it wouldn't interfere with each other. And then this input file is coming from the Blazor components forms. So we can have multiple. If you click it, it opens the window to select your files. Then you can say, I want to filter on specific file formats, file types. Then followed by the files to preview. So once they're selected, they're added to a list of preview files, and it's just displaying a card with the image, the name, the content type, the file size, and a remove button to undo it again. Then these two buttons, save and reset, we saw. Okay, and now we have the parameters, so maximum amount of files you want to allow. So if you go over that in the file picker and then press select, it's going to error. Max file size, I set the default to 20 megabytes. Accepted file formats is a comma separated list of content types, so image, PNG, image, so the types you want to allow. This could be text HTML, this could be application PDF. And then this image is just an extra I'm allowing because it's slightly different to upload an image than to upload a file. And also in the previews, if I know it's an image, then I can display that thumbnail. We'll see more about that. On uploaded, just a callback. That's gonna notify the parent component whenever we're done uploading. If the parent component needs to know about that. For example, maybe you want to get back the uploaded URLs and then store those into, well, fill some form fields with those. Files to preview, a simple list. Let's take a look at the file preview object, name, content type, original name. So that's actually the actual file name when you select it. And the name will be that random generated GUID. Size is image string, and uploaded URL. So image string we'll talk about, that's the base64 string. That's basically the content encoded to a base64 string. Upload requests we already saw, and then it has a property files of file to upload. We saw this one as well. The byte array of content, name, content type. That's what the backend then receives. Handle input file change. So if we actually selected, we're done selecting files. If the count is more or equal than the maximum amount, we don't want to do anything. If we're good to go, then we're getting multiple files. If there's just one, this will still work. That's okay. From the input file change event args, we are getting the files, and we pass along the max amount. So that's going to cause the error if we select more. So that's why I try catched it. Let's see. If the file is already in our list of previews, then we want to skip that because that's a duplicate. So this file object comes from the file picker, so that's the original name. This is a bit hacky. So if it's the content type is within one of the accepted file formats, we just return the content type of that file. Otherwise, we're kind of forcing the first one. File extension, just getting that .png out of there. So if it's an image, we want to request a file image, and we can specify a max width and height. And then the actual file content, so we're creating a memory stream to read that the file contents into the memory stream. And then we can get that buffer. So that's then the byte array of the file contents. And here we generate that new file name, so the random GUID. And then to the request object, so what we want to send over to the backend, we're just adding the file in a newly formatted way. So, and then the file preview is merely a view model to display those cards that you saw in the demo. Base64 string. The reason I'm only doing it for images right now is purely because I can then use that in the image tag in the source to display that preview, so to preview that image. We don't want to be trying that with PDFs. We could maybe in a iframe or something, but we generally don't want to try that with other types than images. But as I mentioned before, let's say we step away from the form data, sending the form data over HTTP, and we use JSON instead, then we might be able to reuse that same method to create our request data to send over. So actually uploading the files over HTTP, so we call that method we saw before with the request data. We saw that in the HTTP client. And we want to get back the list of uploaded file response. So the name and uploaded URL. And then we want to find, so in our files to preview, which is constructed in here, where we have the original name and that name, we actually want to extend that and add the uploaded URL to that object to then have that text box where you can copy the URL from. So we're basically just updating the preview. And then I use the callback, like I mentioned before. Let's say your parent component wants to get those uploaded files, the URLs, maybe to display it, maybe to bind it to a form. Then the remove file method is simply called on the callback of the preview component. If you then remove those files again, so if I choose one, let's say, and I click close, that's basically removing the preview. Then we're just removing that from our request data and from our preview. So the get base64 string wants the byte array content and the content type. And then these links are mostly the same. So starts with data, then pass along the content type, so image PNG or application PDF, and then convert to base64 string, Microsoft method we can use. So let's take a look at that base64 string. So basically if I take a few images and I get this nice display that's thanks to that base64 string, which will be a date. It's basically the encoding of your byte array content, of your file content. So that's 262 kilobytes. So that's not just a simple string, that's actually containing the data. And then this little reset button is just clearing all of our lists. So that's this method below. And that's all there is to it. Of course, we need to register our backend project. So add files API and then map our files endpoints. We only have one at the moment. And then for the front end, we add the add files shared SPA, both in our WebAssembly project as in the pre-render server. And that's it. So now we have the file upload. And we're already at episode 18. So that's another major component done. I think the payments will be next because that's another major one. And all the rest we can basically build with everything we already have. So advertisements will need some of the payments, some of the file upload functionality, some of the authorization and stuff. Members as well is going to be using those same components. Advertisements also will benefit from the metrics. Rating review is simple CRUD, create, read, update, delete. So yeah, just some forms and HTTP calls, I think. Maybe rating or reviewing by email, so then we can use that SMTP mailer that I added into the authentication module. Contact the same, that's just mailing. CMS is just Blazor forms and then doing HTTP calls to the backend, making sure that ends up in the database and getting those things back out to display. FAQ, that's one of the simplest ones, that's simple CRUD. Products will need some of the payments, file upload. DLC is a bit the same. So yeah, you let me know what you want to see. I'll definitely do the payments next, and that will be with the most known one, I think, with Stripe. I've currently used Molly, but that's a more European local one, I think, but it works more or less the same. And then of course I need to tie everything together. We have everything, we have the metadata tags, we have the file uploads, we have the authorization, and everything of course needs my personal branding style. So more like the YouTube channel. And then I will be ready to upload that. So upload that to an Azure App Service. I already made videos about those, but if you really want to see that, please let me know in the comments. And also let me know which of the other blocks you want me to build. I hope you liked this episode. Hit that like button, subscribe for the upcoming episodes, and even if this series ends at episode 20, there will be more video series to come, more episodes in general to come. And as usual, I will publish this code to Patreon, so then you have this nice image upload component